April 5th study session of the Des Moines City Council to order. And will Deputy Mayor Pennington please lead us in the flag salute?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We could let the record show that all council members are present. And council, if I was thinking for continuity's sake, since we have 4 distinct items on our agenda, that instead of just having public comment all at one time, if someone's signed up, let's have them speak before we take the topic and then speak before we take the topic. Is everybody okay with that? Okay. I cannot, Louisa, I'll be looking down. I couldn't tell if you nodded or not. So you're okay with that? Okay, thank you. Okay, so let's see. Okay, our first topic is the telecommunications code update, and it looks like we have one person signed up to speak. Is that Julian Lowe? Okay.
Hi, good evening. Julian Lowe with Puget Sound Energy. I'm the local government affairs manager for City of Des Moines. And I just wanted to say to the city staff, council members, that PSC has a pole services division whereby we work with municipalities and jurisdictions on street lighting issues. But we also know that jurisdictions throughout our service territory are dealing with small cell deployment issues. And so if, again, if council members, staff have any questions at all, please let us know how we can be a resource. I'm happy to connect you with our subject matter experts on small cell and pole attachment and co-location issues. That's Bill Martin and Matthew Krause. So again, let us know how we can be a partner with the city. Look forward to our continued productive relationship moving together to make Des Moines a great place to live, work, and play. Thank you.
Before you step down, Michael's going to have a comment. I would also like to give you the moment to make a comment of what you'll be doing in the city working with our small businesses in
Okay. Thank you, Mayor.
Just please be brief, but
yes.
Please go ahead.
Let me introduce my colleague, Leslie Myers, who is with our customer outreach team, and she'll share a quick little blurb about that.
Yeah, hi. Hi, everybody. I'll be very quick. Actually, I spent most of today in Des Moines talking to the small businesses about the campaign we've got going on next week. Essentially, we're going to be going door to door and setting appointments for our contractors to come back through and replace all of the lighting in our business, in the Des Moines businesses, with energy efficient LEDs. There's no cost for the bulbs. There's no cost for the installation, and customers should see immediate savings on their bills once it's in place. I'm already getting really good feedback. People are excited in Des Moines for sure.
Thank you.
Yeah, free to save money. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Julian, so one thing that the city is excited about, partnership with PSC, is the undergrounding of utilities in the alleyway, like 223rd down to 227th. And we've worked closely with your staff, and we appreciate their participation in resolutions that we're coming to move that forward. So that's another area I think that we have partnership.
Great. Well, definitely know a lot of great things happening economically here in the city, and that's just sort of one small part where we play a role. So thank you so much for that, and I'll be sure to share that with my colleagues. Okay. Great. Thanks, everyone.
We'll tell them your characterization of a $500,000 project was just another small thing you're doing
Okay.
in the city.
Okay, no, definitely know that that's no small investment by the city as well. So thank you again.
Thank you. Okay, that takes us to our telecommunications code update, and we have a presentation by our city attorney, Tim George.
Thank you, Mayor. Well, I'd like to introduce our consultant. This is Scott Snyder sitting next to me. He's an attorney with the law firm Ogden Murphy Wallace, and we retained him about a year ago to help us navigate this new technology, kind of the maze of small cell technology, federal law, state law, and then the interplay of the telecommunications companies and where our city needs to be moving forward in relation to this. So Scott's going to provide this presentation tonight, which is basically just an introduction to this. And we are currently working on a draft ordinance to update our codes to this new technology, and that will be brought forward later in the summer. So I'll hand it over to Scott at this point.
Good evening. Again, Scott Snyder. Interesting that the gentleman from PSE was here, because the PSE and the industry are important players in crafting your ordinance. And we've worked collaboratively in other communities with both the industry and the pole owner, who's a major player. So after the staff and I are done with the draft ordinance, one of the next steps will be circulating it for comment to PSE and the other users of the poles. I note the sign behind me says no cell phones, so this would be one of the few places in the country where that's true. A lot of the, let's start with the why. As you're aware, smartphones they have a telecommunications traditional role as a phone, but 80% of the data that's transmitted through smart devices these days is video. You've probably seen ads for, free Netflix for life if you sign up with the company. It emphasizes that we've got a technology that's both important to the individuals, but it's that volume is driving the need to densify the existing network, and we'll talk about what densification means. These that we're going to be going through, these slides are from the industry themselves, and basically what they show is exponential growth. The densification, you may have had that experience of having your cell phone, having bars, but not being able to download a video or some other dense bit of information. Macro sites, the tall towers, monopoles that have been the backbone of the cellular industry, are simply insufficient for a variety of reasons. It can be shading by buildings. It can be high density nodes like a high school parking lot where there's a lot of data usage. When we started less than 2 years ago working in this area, we were looking primarily at downtown areas, again, high school parking lots. This is a fascinating area because it's constantly evolving. I watch way too much DIY television, and if you see the refrigerators that you can check and see what's in them, or the gentleman who's at the basketball game and is checking his security device to see if the burglar's in the backyard. All of that Internet of Things is supported by the cell phone, the current cellular network. And in order to make it work and to densify the existing signals from the macro sites, small cells are being deployed. So the next question is, so how small is small cell? On the right, your standard monopole or tower, which can be anywhere from 60 to 120 feet. Small cells are deployed on light poles and typically existing utility poles. So ideally, from the industry's point of view, that equipment is being located anywhere from 20 to 40 feet in the air as opposed to 120 feet. A little person there for scale. State statute defines what a small cell is. Basically an equipment cabinet of 17 cubic feet and an antenna of 3 cubic feet. The problem with the state definition is it doesn't address how many antennas, and it ignores, or it doesn't address, a lot of the equipment that's associated and required to make the small cell work. On a pole, the antenna that I mentioned at the top, one antenna goes in one direction. There can be two, which gives a line of sight transmission. In order to maximize the use of a pole, it may be 4 antennas, which give a 360-degree working radius. I mentioned the things that aren't included. At the bottom, we've got the box, the equipment box, but you'll note on the left-hand side of the pole, the conduit. The conduit, state and federal law, electrical codes require that fiber be in a separate conduit from electrical power. Those same statutes and electrical codes require that the conduits stand off 6 inches from the pole, so that although most people use cherry picker trucks these days, that someone could, in theory, climb the pole safely.
Can I interrupt you for one?
Yes, sir, please.
We're trying to get a signal up on that TV so folks can look that way if they can't see this, but if you'd like to turn your chairs, you're welcome to. Don't worry about disruption, and I just wanted to give us a minute to it. It doesn't look like we're quite there. So it may not happen tonight, but in the future, we'll activate that screen, so.
Yes, sir, thank you.
Go ahead, thanks.
The gentleman from PSE, I want to emphasize, PSE is an important player. The pole owner is going to help define the policy box, what things look like. They do so by pole attachment agreements. Now, small cells, again, this is a installation on an existing wooden utility pole. They can be installed internally and externally on the gooseneck light poles. They can be installed in decorative lighting poles. The latter two are often owned by municipalities. The next slide I've added in the last 2 weeks because one of the newer forms of small cell installation are strand mounts. They're typically less than 3 cubic feet as opposed to the 17 plus cubic feet that we were talking about. They're not an alternative to the small cells, but they can help extend the range and cut down the number of small cell installations. One question I frequently ask, it's one company per pole. The pole owners, whether it's PSE, Tacoma Power and Light, Seattle Light, don't allow more than one operator on a pole, one company on a pole. We've been working on a draft ordinance. Your city has a wireless communication provision that deals with facilities throughout the city. Small cells are challenging from a local government standpoint because by going on existing poles in the right-of-way, they reverse a trend that's been underway for the last 25, 30 years of undergrounding. The time I've been in the municipal practice, I began working on a GTE lawsuit that held that cities had the right to require undergrounding. The FCC has determined that the existing poles in the right-of-way are a resource for the deployment of small cells. And one thing I'll emphasize several times during this presentation, the size of the policy box that the city has to operate in is to a certain extent defined by state law, federal law. The FCC is, I'll be frank, a captive federal organization part of whose charge is to promote interstate commerce and to promote the deployment of small cell networks. So under the past administration, that was, at one level of intensity. Under Chairman Pai, they have an ear in Washington, and a lot of heat right now is going on about how much the utilities can charge for pole attachment agreements to put these facilities in place. But between the FCC, the state, and the pole owner, in your case, primarily PSE, they're defining what things look like and where they're going to go. The city obviously has an interest in your urban environment and what things look like. But again, we always need to keep in mind that this is being driven by consumer choices. It's something that's necessitated in order to densify the network and make sure that people can use the devices that you have in front of you. But also in a way that is thoughtful as possible in terms of the city's built environment. I mentioned sort of the, not complexity, but the challenges. Another challenge is that in most cities for years, use of the public right-of-way has been an engineering function, whereas the installation of the macro towers has been a land use function. Because of federal shot clocks that I'll touch on in a minute, shot clocks, time limits on consideration, land use does not work well. Deployment in the public right-of-way under the Growth Management Act is not a land use process. And in order to meet the federal guidelines, tools like conditional use permits that maybe are completely appropriate for a macro site or a large tower just won't work if you're talking about deployments of anywhere from dozens to hundreds of small cells in various communities. Give you an idea of the rate of change, I mentioned the data transmission. Seattle City Light 4 years ago had 7 small cell applications. The year after they had 3. Last year they didn't have any, and so far this year they've had 13,000. The companies, particularly Verizon, is one of the first, but all of the companies are going to be deploying small cells in the public right-of-way in the immediate future. The city's right-of-way has typically been handled through the exercise of franchising powers by the city. And that's a very strong power that when exercised by a city council. It's a contracting power. The courts give great deference to city council determinations about franchising and contracts. You can't force a contract on someone, but you have a lot more deference. It's not a land use process where there are 2 players. You as the city are the stewards of the public right-of-way. I mentioned the land use process and shot clocks. As I noted, right-of-way use is not a land use action. And as the staff and I have been working, the model we're working on is trying to emphasize the city's strongest cards, that is to use franchising control and contracting control, and using the land use process for the more difficult process situations. That is, where do you put a pole in an area that's been undergrounded? This is above ground technology. So there needs to be some new facility. And you can imagine if you're in a neighborhood that just paid for an LID to underground, and now you find that poles are going right back up to put another device in the air, it's design and limiting the impacts will be important. That's true for new poles. Main street areas, design districts are also important. Areas where the city, whether directly through investment in ornamental poles or through design standards that you've adopted for a signature district, look, we need to maintain that look through the code process. As I mentioned, the size of the policy box is defined by state and federal law. A city may not exclude a wireless communication provider from the city. I mentioned the Federal Communications Commission. This is interstate commerce in its truest form. And there's a lot of logic behind the FCC's position. If Des Moines had one standard and Normandy Park another and Burien another, it would be virtually impossible to have a coordinated network because all these small cells work together. So it's important that the city, 1, not exclude, and 2, not try and dictate the technological choices of the provider. That's prohibited by federal law. You can't prohibit a provider from closing significant gaps in coverage. Again, this is a technology that it can be mildly irritating in terms of a dropped car, but in the near future, if there are driverless vehicles that are operated through a small cell network, as we get into that sort of the next Uber generation here, there are public safety issues in making sure that those drops don't occur. A city may not regulate radio frequency emissions, RF emissions. It's preempted by federal law. And the city can't discriminate between service providers. Yes, ma'am.
So if, especially this Uber thing resonated, if there are those, and I hope not, but at some point in time where there are those driverless vehicles, and we determine that we don't want poles, or we won't have as many poles to deal with these cells, then would we be liable if there was an accident? Is that what you're saying?
Actually, I'm a step earlier.
Oh, okay.
The city can't prohibit the closing those gaps in coverage.
Oh, they
So
cannot.
so even if you, for example, prohibited new poles or you tried to maintain underground areas, you're going to have some out to allow the installation of whether it's rooftop facilities or standalone poles to provide that uniform coverage.
So we have to do that.
Yes, ma'am. Again, no gap in
No
coverage.
gap. Okay.
Cities can address aesthetic issues while you can't, if a provider shows that there's a significant gap in coverage, you got to allow them a means to close it, but you can require that they use the least intrusive means to do so. And as you'll see when we get to the standards, we started off with, I think, 6 lines of design guidelines. We're now up to 7 pages, dealing with, wood poles, concrete poles, metal poles, ornamental poles, those wire mount or strand mounted facilities that I showed in an earlier picture. A city can regulate under state law new poles in the right of way and utility poles over 60 feet in height. And you can also charge ground lease fees for those facilities. I mentioned early in the role of PSE, and they will be invited, I hope, to the table to discuss the draft. We typically circulate the draft to the companies and to PSE for comment. The city's light standards, you have an important role in, and the city as a pole owner can also control that design by pole attachment agreements. They want to use your pole, it'll look the way you would like it to look. State and National Electrical Code also play a big part in where the facilities are placed. Mr. George and I will be contacting PSE about the placement and the use of the communication space in conjunction with one of your neighboring communities. PSE's has typically required that the facilities be at the top of the pole so they can use the cherry picker trucks. In a slope environment with a sound view, the higher it is, the more people will see it. So hopefully we're trying to be proactive and ask PSE to take a look at locating those facilities under the wires rather than over the electrical transmission wires where appropriate. Shot clocks, I mentioned this. One of the reasons land use doesn't work very well and why the ordinance will focus on franchising powers. Franchises, master permits, cities have 120 days under state law to grant. co-locations, that is, the location of facilities on existing towers and base stations, you've got 90 days to act, and you've only got 60 days to act in terms of upgrading facilities. Your code already contains these provisions. Your code also already contains fairly comprehensive and good provisions regarding the deployment of macro facilities. So the goal here is to fit small cell regulation into your existing ordinance structure. Franchise application, the companies have the option of, as if they are new to the city, to come in and locate small cells in detail, negotiate. The council's decision as a legislative act is given a lot of deference by the court. That's a good time to get what you want. Companies with existing franchises will need another quicker administrative process. So as we go through, we're going to be incorporating the federal shot clocks, taking advantage of the court's deference to the exercise of your franchising power. I think it's also important to understand that utilities have been using your right-of-way appropriately for many years without a lot of regulation by the city. We're talking about small cell facilities. It's something else on the pole. But the utility companies have been putting transformers on poles without a lot of input from the cities for years. So we're trying to treat small cell deployments like other uses of the public right-of-way. There will be small cell design and concealment standards. There'll be both standards for the typical kinds of poles and then a process to develop a concealment plan in your design districts or other districts where you feel there may be a special need, undergrounded areas. Someone may ask, a question that usually comes up is, what about the shoreline? The good news and the bad news is that the shoreline is not a great place to put small cells because they don't work very well over water. The technology is a downward focused and it has trouble with water. So they're typically not along the shoreline. Again, think of your existing utility poles as a resource and make sure that they're used first and their use is maximized. You're going to retain your existing macro tower provision and again, save that scrutiny for new poles and deviations from your standards.
So, I'm trying to get an idea of how many of these things are we talking about? So for one particular service provider, let's say Verizon, are we talking, on average here in Des Moines, are we talking about one of these every 100 feet, every 6 blocks?
500 to 800 feet, depending on frequency. Each operator bids and buys from the federal, or leases from the federal government a different frequency. So, they vary on how far apart they can be, but typically over a block apart.
Okay, and then you had mentioned ideally only one service provider per pole.
Correct.
But if we found an area where a pole was not going to be so ugly and it's not going to block views and be intrusive, is it possible to do a bigger pole and get a whole bunch of service providers on one pole that's less of a visual impairment?
Not on an existing pole, and that's the choice of the pole owners. In theory, you could locate facilities on poles, and what you're going to end up with, in all likelihood, over time, is a maximization of your existing poles for different providers. I mean, Sprint, T-Mobile, AT&T, Mobility, Verizon, all have their own designs and will have their own separate networks.
Would it be possible for the city to put up one big pole to get a whole bunch of providers in one area to reduce the number of these things?
The short answer is no, because unlike macro facilities which work well in the air, and many cities take advantage of water tower sites for macro deployment, you know, they're a great place to put it. City gets revenue and you can't really see it on top of the water tower. These need to be anywhere from 25 to 40 feet in the air to work. They're filling in the space between the macro towers. So again, these are going to be, it's a different technology.
So, what I'm understanding is we have kind of a narrow scope of how much control we actually have based on federal and state laws, correct?
Yes, sir.
And then the other question that I have is currently, now you see the advertising, I think, and I use Xfinity, they're getting into the cell business, it sounds like, and currently they use our right-of-ways and have refused to enter into a franchise agreement. Is this a tool to get them to enter into an agreement with us?
Xfinity, you're talking about internet
Comcast,
service.
yeah, well, but this, just in, that's part of it, but just in general, is there an upside to this for the city?
I don't want to be too negative, but no, there aren't many upsides to this. Again, I think what we're going to be seeing over the next 5 to 10 years is the movement of what you now think of as cable television to, it's all data. And more, I hate to say, the cable TV and your revenue from cable TV will decline as more and more generations of users use smartphones and small tablets to get their, to check their Facebook or YouTube or, you know, watch TV. It's a different generational thing. And it's also, it's business. Under federal law, you can charge a 5% franchise fee for cable television, but not for internet use, data use, or telecom. And if you're providing data, how are you going to provide data if you can provide a service for 5% less? I think what we're going to be seeing is a migration to this technology from cable TV. Now, that said, Comcast and some of the other providers have already deployed, you may have seen on strands, small white boxes about this big and wondered what they were. They're Wi-Fi networks being deployed by Comcast and some of the other cable companies. Because, you know, back in the 60s and late 60s and 70s, when those first franchises were first approved, they basically had the right to erect towers and cable and underground cable and antenna. So they're very broad, and those companies are deploying their Wi-Fi facilities, already have. There are hundreds of thousands of Comcast Wi-Fi boxes already on strands.
Okay, thanks.
So when you're talking about the distance that's needed between cells, 500 to 800 feet, and you're considering, for example, I'll just pick a street, South 216th, where we've just done redone our entire corridor with new, beautiful light posts, you're only going to have room enough on those posts if only one company per pole. Max out at 2, possibly 3 companies then can use South 216th Street. And so I can tell you have a response to that. Secondarily, since we cannot prevent them from, a company from entering our community or closing gaps, would we have the option of building the pole, or can they say, no, we build the pole? Anyway, you can see where I'm going with that.
Sure. The first deployments, I mean, the major resource are wooden poles, the wooden what we think of as electric poles, utility poles. That's the primary resource. If a company wants to put anything on your decorative pole or your light standard, they're gonna have to sign a pole attachment agreement. You've got a lot of leverage. And typically, there are designs that can incorporate most of, the antennas have to be outside to operate, but you can require, for example, a replacement pole with the equipment interior to the pole. And the other typical provisions are drivers hit poles. So, you make sure that in your yard there are spares, that they provide. Having one of the provisions of the ordinance encourages, and we have a lot of pushback from AT&T on this. I'm sorry, I don't want to finger AT&T. It's actually T-Mobile, because their equipment is slightly different. Most cities want, if you put money into a look, you want that look to be uniform throughout the district. And again, that's one of the design requirements that will be central to what you do. So if someone wants to use your light pole and they put they have to pay for the replacement pole, and two, put as much in the interior of the pole as possible, and then conceal the equipment that goes on the outside.
So if there aren't enough poles for the amount of companies that want to enter a certain corridor or area, they just need to be installed?
There may be a time out in the future when all the poles are full. If technology does what technology does, it continues to get smaller and things will change. It's there will be an event horizon when the poles are full, but the question is, where will technology be 10, 15 years from now? My crystal ball is not that clear.
Thank you. So another question, is that right? Can I keep asking?
Sure.
Okay. So could you talk for a moment about the difference between the reasoning with these poles? For example, the macro poles can be placed on leased land from a private person. So if you're in a neighborhood with entirely undergrounded power and you only need to go 25 minimum feet, what would prevent this movement from being able to lease the top of a home? Are you putting the equipment on private property in the tops of homes or in somehow like that? I know that it sounds like it all has to be in rights of way, but if you're in a community like that, then you don't mess with the view.
There are, well, a couple responses.
Okay.
This technology does not work well on the top of buildings. Macro sites, facilities are often placed on commercial and apartment buildings, but these facilities, because they're line of sight, work best in the right-of-way where they have 360-degree access to, again, so people's phones can read them. If they're on the side of buildings, they only get 180 degrees. Top of buildings, they'll be shading down. One of the reasons the FCC is so focused on seeing existing utility poles as an asset to be utilized is that's where this technology works best. Now, in the undergrounded areas or design areas, the typical things you would go to first are new lighting poles, and it's going to be a revenue source for the city to replace your light poles in the area. There are standalone, they look sort of like flagpoles. They're not that visually intrusive. Schoolyards for example, I don't want to get parents excited about, radio waves and their children, but high school light standards are a great place to put these. The light standard in a parking lot, for example, at your local 7-Eleven, another good place to put these in undergrounded areas. So there are alternatives, but the ordinance will require that if you're going into an underground area or a special design area, you have to individually create a concealment plan that fits in with the neighborhood and the community. So that's again, I think of this as one, maximizing all those existing utility poles, fill them up first, and then in the more require greater scrutiny and specific plans for those problematic areas you want to protect.
Thank you.
Councilmember Mahoney.
You mentioned the radio waves in the school, and that was one of the questions I had is, are there studies about the health hazards of these? You know, cell phones to the ear and the radiation and stuff like that. I have concerns.
Yes, sir. And the short answer is cities are preempted by federal law from regulating. There are things that you can do, and the ordinance will contain them all. Require a certification by an electrical engineer for each specific facility to say that it complies with federal law. Your franchise will have a provision that provides that if there's something is not functioning properly, it be immediately removed. Again, according to the FCC and industry spokesman, you're a lot more risk using your microwave in your kitchen. But there are people where there's a difference of opinion. But the short answer is everything that you are permitted to do by the federal government will be included in the ordinance.
So in a given city, do they have an estimate of how many of these we're talking about?
Well, again, you can kind of envision that there will be networks, and each provider will have its own network and equipment. I mean, we may reach a point. Verizon's the first that they're deploying in your area. They're the first ones coming through. They're putting the most money into it. You've probably seen the ads with some of the other carriers making fun of their, OSO 2010 network. Again, they're upgrading, but each company will have its own technology and will be putting its own facilities in.
Yeah, I was just interested if they kind of had a number per square mile or whatever.
They typically come in networks, and each provider in a community your size, there may be from 20 to 50 locations depending on their frequency.
Per carrier.
Yes.
Okay. We already asked the building question. So obviously, some of those photos pretty aesthetically ugly, for lack of a better word.
Sure.
Obviously, things are going to get smaller, and they're probably going to get more powerful, more efficient, and so forth. Is there any recourse the city has about upgrading and updating these in the future? I mean, if we got to take them, and they're, for lack of a better word, butt ugly, what can we do, to improve the aesthetics, maybe with better technology or smaller technology, or do we have any recourse, is my question.
Within the state definition,
No?
but let's say this. Understand that the technology has already evolved where the companies don't need 17 cubic feet for their equipment cabinet. But they're, at the state legislature, very protective of it because they're going to need that space when they roll out 5G. You've heard, there's a lot of talk about 5G. Understand that the technology that's being deployed now is 4G technology. 5G is on the way, but they just, less than 6 months ago, leased the frequencies for 5G. Nobody knows what the equipment looks like. Yes, it will be smaller, but it will typically go in the equipment boxes that are already there. Again, the cell companies, their business, and they want to deploy they want to buy as little stuff as possible. And as it gets smaller, yes, it will be internal.
If I could dovetail off that question, though. I've been in, oceanside towns that, I don't know how they did it, but their cell tower looks like a tree. And so they had somehow move forward with design not guidelines, I think requirements in their ordinances, and they were able to get certain things, because you're right, the poles, I mean, maybe we can get inside, but the numbers you're speaking of, it's gonna be a pretty tight fit, and each pole is gonna have to be, I don't know, it's gonna be, it's limited based on the network access and so forth. So I guess what I'm saying is to, since it seems like because of the level we are in the pecking order, that we are gonna have less and less choice, I think what Councilmember Mahoney was getting to, and what I want to clarify is, what exactly can we say we want and need?
And, again, for new poles in, your design districts, and others, the ordinance will provide for a specifically developed concealment plan, and that may be a frankentree, like you're discussing. I assume you don't want a saguaro cactus.
I didn't know it had a technical term.
The companies I've seen, I mean, there are catalogs, thicker than your binder, with hundreds of designs. And again, the typical, again, wooden poles are gonna fill up first. And we can argue about how intrusive it is, but I think we'd all agree it's ugly, but is any uglier than the transformer I've got in front of my house? We can go. In your design districts, you mentioned I've talked to staff about are the blue poles, the new poles that you put in? Part of your focus will be saying when the time comes to use them, that the equipment is internal into a replacement pole, and only the minimum necessary antenna on the outside would be visible. Color and non-reflective color, making sure that to the extent you can, it fits in with the pole. As we proceed through the process, one thing I always recommend is get industry spokesmen here, have them talk about their technology. I don't want to be a shill for them. And the Verizon engineer, and she meant it as a compliment, told me one time that 90% of my presentation is accurate. I'm a lawyer. I'm not an electrical engineer. And having their representatives here to talk about RF frequency, to show you their designs, to discuss concealment measures, is an important part of the process, as is having PSE at the table to see what you can do with the pole design. Because as I mentioned, a lot of what's ugly about that is the conduit. But the conduit that's what's required by both the national and state electrical codes. Having it offset 6 inches creates, clutter. But there's some practical common sense things that standards will require. Make sure that the equipment box is on the street side of the pole, so that the pole is between that box and the property owner. Doesn't have to looks as little of the box as they can. But we'll be talking.
Deputy Mayor Pennington, you have questions?
Yeah, so, and maybe the person from Puget Sound Energy can answer this, but what's the spacing between poles, between power poles? Okay. My guess is they're less than 500 feet between poles. And what's the spacing between our city lights on 216th and on 24th Avenue, where we put in the new style lights? Less than 500 feet. So we have a pretty high likelihood that since there's one vendor per pole, that every pole in the city is going to be hung with this stuff. Okay, thanks.
So I have a question for you. This is not a technical question by any means, okay? The idea is that, kind of the the inversion of having relatively little power to determine our fate in this process. Have you observed, is it typical for, you know, any of the providers of these services, you know, that the benefits, obviously efficiency in the market and market share and, you know, the comprehensive nature of their networks and access and all of that. But have you seen them reach out to cities and try to participate in ways that create good faith with cities above and beyond the requirements?
Very much so. Let me give you an example. I may be aware that Montlake Terrace is creating a downtown center. Dorothy Parker once said, I think, that Philadelphia, there's no there there. Yeah, was that, but that idea of they're trying to create a look and a downtown core. We had a meeting, all the cell providers and Snohomish County PUD came to discuss just that. You know, again, where can we locate facilities around it? Let me, an example, a cell provider does not want to make an investment to go on a pole in an area that's going to be undergrounded and then have to build another facility somewhere else. The point, I suppose, in theory, we could end up with something on every pole. In reality, these are going to be networks, and there'll be some streets that have facilities, others that don't. One policy suggestion, you're going to determine what's right for your city, but I'd suggest that getting into individual pole placement is on the road to madness, in the sense that these facilities are located in a network, and they have to be, certain spacing is determined by engineering. I'd suggest that to the extent you can, rely on their engineers to put the general location. What I'm getting at is, if I come in and say, I don't want that pole in front of my house, and you have a process that moves it, you're moving it in front of someone else's house. And when you do, you may be rippling 20 other poles and their location in front of 20 other people's houses. And realizing that over time, these facilities will be installed. You know, it's like hanging art. You know, when you put it up, you're going to see it. Over time, people will get used to the environment. I'm not saying that it's an improvement, but I am suggesting that to the extent you can, let neutral engineering decisions drive placement rather than political concerns, because, again, if it's not your house, it's somebody else's.
So in regard to policy and Washington state laws, you know, Washington is trying to move forward to mandating this technology, and taking it totally out of the hands of the cities, right? They're trying. It didn't pass this year. And so my question has to do with, let's say we enter, is there a benefit to entering into some of these agreements before the state of Washington passes any of this legislation? In other words, would some of our previously made agreements hold out underneath any new state law that would take the power away from us? So do you see what I'm saying? Is there a benefit in creating agreements before Washington state takes away all of our power? And if they do, will those state laws override anything anyway?
Okay, constitutionally, a legislature can impair a contract. So an existing franchisor contract will remain in effect. Alana Zana, my firm, and I have worked real closely with Victoria Lincoln at the AWC lobbyist over the past 2 sessions. Washington, 35 states have passed industry legislation. The legislature here has passed twice. A lot of the drive initially was, these darn cities aren't, you know, they don't have permitting procedures. They're not getting ready for us to come in. We've got all this infrastructure. You're denying people infrastructure. And what has been occurring is cities like yours are stepping up and passing ordinances. The industry focused from the first year of basically preempting every darn thing. In the last session, they were more focused on limiting pole attachment costs, what utilities and cities could charge for the right to be on their poles. And in each case, there were grandfathering provisions in the legislation that acknowledged cities who'd step forward and take an action. So if the question, yes, there's an advantage to doing something and being proactive. Yes, ma'am.
Well, I think, first of all, I want to say your presentation and your wealth of knowledge is very helpful. A little discouraging at times, but very helpful. But
Might get a cactus in your front.
a cactus. No, I'm going to stick with you. I think I want a palm tree. But anyway, I think it's going to lead us to much further discussion. So I really want to thank you for your time tonight and helping us go through this. I think in the interest of the other topics that we have. Sure.
Brief conclusion here. So where we're at right now, we have a draft ordinance that still needs some work on the staff end. It's about 45 pages right now. It's a lengthy document. And so when we're done with that, we're going to send that out to the telecommunications providers, PSC, and get that input. And then we'll take all of that, we'll put something together for the city council to start to consider. This would be something that would likely come back to the council in June. So that's kind of the time frame we're looking at, and we'd most likely be coming for a public hearing at that time,
Okay.
or a first reading.
Yeah. No, you're still on a pretty fast timeline for something like this, so,
Well, we've been working on it for a long time, so.
yeah. Well, that shows based on the amount of information we've been given tonight. So, with that, before we go into our next topic, I'd like to give us a 5-minute break and allow people to reposition so they can see the board and stuff a little bit better. And then we will reconvene. So that'll take us to Okay, I'm going to bring us back, and our next topic is our Aviation Advisory Committee. But as mentioned in the beginning, before we go into the presentation, I will start with public comments. So our first person is it Dana Holloway?
Good evening. Mayor and City Council, thank you for allowing me to speak. My name is Dana Holloway. I'm a 42-year resident of Federal Way. And in the last 3.5 years, the airplane noise in Federal Way has gotten louder. The airplanes are flying at lower altitudes, and the frequency of the airplanes in the flight path can be less than 1 minute apart. I'm not telling you anything you don't already know and experience for yourselves. Needless to say, I was looking for information to learn about this situation, and I found the Quiet Skies of Puget Sound Facebook page. I learned that people in Des Moines had the same issues and had created a group of like-minded residents to learn and share information and to take action. In the last 6 months, I've driven around your little city of Des Moines, and I couldn't believe how really loud and low your airplanes are over your community. I realize why your residents have organized, trying to protect their deteriorating quality of life and health impacts caused by living near the airport. As elected officials for the city of Des Moines, I encourage you to do anything and everything that's in your power to stop the damage being done to your community. We need to band together to make our voices heard. And I'd like to end in a quote by Helen Keller. Alone, we can do so little. Together, we can do so much. Thank you.
Thank you. Marianne Markkanen?
Good evening, Mayor, City Council. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. I live on the third runway off of Des Moines Memorial Way. I have constant aircraft noise day and night. When the third runway first came in, we were led to believe that it was going to be for runoff, and now it's a regular air flight path. There's no runoff. It's day and night. It's robbing me of sleep, peace of mind, my health. You know, I'm reading all this stuff about the health issues. It's now affecting my cable reception, my cell phone reception. I'll be talking to people a lot, and my cell phone will just go off, and I'll hear an airplane, so I know what's going on. I'm also hearing that there's going to be a huge increase in the volume of airplanes in this area, and I don't see anyone. I read about it. I'm also a Quiet Skies member, by the way. I hear rumors, I read about it, but why isn't anyone having the FAA come in here and be honest with us? You know, what's this next gen thing that places all over the country are hearing about? Why isn't anyone telling us about this? I'm hearing that we have as much traffic as Dallas-Fort Worth that has like over 10,000 acres to our 2,500. We need another airport now. We needed it last year. I don't see our elected officials driving this issue. I hear that everybody's happy that the new FAA building is going to generate a lot more money in taxes. There was this huge initiative the last couple years for the pay to park down at the marina. Our property taxes have gone up over 20% in Des Moines in this area. And still, there's silence about the health impact of the airport, the growth of the airport. I'd like to see the city officials come out with a strong message to us that you see that the health impacts are going to be horrible on us. The increased traffic, I'm sure most of you live in this area. Aren't you worried about the same thing that we are? So I implore you to please come out with a stronger message. The FAA needs to control the nighttime flights. It used to be pretty quiet from 12 to 6. Now it's not. And I see that they're just getting away with murder. And here we are, citizens, 20% property tax increase. Come on, you guys. We need your help. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. J.C. Harris.
So a visitor coming down 216th and seeing the gleaming new FAA building would be surprised to learn that there had been any sort of disagreement between the cities and the airport as recently as 10 years ago. And so it's no wonder that residents here are kind of emotionally checked out on the whole problem, because they see that building and it psychologically tells them what the city's position is. You know, that you welcome the airport and all that it has brought to the city. I saw on the agenda that you are welcoming suggestions, and I was an engineer, and these may not sound practical, but they're very practical. You should stop taking any grants from the airport. It does no good. It creates this psychological idea of partnership. The port has done a tremendous job in rebuilding this idea that, well, like you go to a Highline Forum and everybody has coffee and donuts, and it's almost like, hey, we're all on the same team together, you know, fighting in the great wars. We're not on the same team. 10 years ago, we were ready to beat each other to death. And that problem never got addressed, okay? They won, we lost, but what was sued over, the problem didn't go away. Now, I'm an engineer, and so I'm not a research scientist, so I stop as soon as I get a good enough answer. And the data that I need to know what needs to be done, I got in 1997. There's plenty of really good data on what needs to be done. And they knew what needed to be done when they sued. They weren't idiots, and it was real simple. Cap the flights at the levels of 2 runways, because Sea-Tac was a 2-runway airport. If they were stupid enough to build a 3rd runway, it's like a guy building or buying a Ferrari. If he's stupid enough to buy a Ferrari, he doesn't get to drive at 200 miles an hour. It's still 65. And the solution is simply to roll things back to a level of flights that is reasonable, where it was in 2010. That's it. There are no other mitigations that will work.
Thank you. Lee Ryan Costin? Thank you.
Hello, all, and thank you for hearing me. I've lived in the South Sea-Tac and Des Moines area for 29 years. And there's some exciting things going on in the city. You know, the FAA, Bartell Drug, some of the things that that you're looking at doing down in the Sound, and that's great for revenue coming in. But there are some things as far as a citizen that I'm really not happy about, and I haven't been happy for a long time. And the major thing is the airport noise. It's just something else. I've got one runway plane coming over one end of my property, and then the other planes are coming over the other end. So I'm just like sandwiched in between. And it's, I don't need to repeat what everybody else has said about health issues and such as that. I don't feel hopeful. And I know that your hands are tied in some areas, and we don't know what you guys have to go through to make things happen. But I'm not willing to wait until I'm, drooling oatmeal onto my, onto my bib in a nursing home for things to change. I've put my house up for sale. my whole thought was when I moved into Des Moines that I was going to be here forever. This is where I was going to die. And I love the area, and I adore my home and my property, but I can't deal with the noise. I can't deal with the airport, and I can't deal with all of the garbage in the air that's coming in. It's horrible when you step outside, and instead of hearing the bumblebees and the birds and all of that, you hear and it's just not, I don't want it to be my home anymore. It really saddens me, it really does. I mean, I'm not a mover shaker, it's not like you're losing somebody really grand, but I pay my taxes, and I'm a decent person, and I don't cause any trouble in the city. And, you know, so it's sad that I'm gonna be leaving because of that, but my house is up for sale, and I will be moving somewhere else. And the first thing I'm looking at when I move there is, where do the airplanes go? It is the first thing I'm looking at, first thing I ask the real estate agents. So there are others I've talked to that are doing the same thing. They're looking at moving. They haven't put their houses up for sale yet, but there are 3 people who are that I've talked to. So, you know, do what you can for the other folks coming in. Thank you.
Thank you. Elizabeth Byrne.
I'm a nervous wreck, so I'm gonna read this. Hopefully I'll get through, sorry. My cane won't stay. Thank you. Good evening, I'm Elizabeth Byrne from Des Moines, Washington. We purchased our home in December of '07, a couple of houses from Marine View. See, this is why I don't like to do this. Toll plans for third runway in effect intended for inclement weather and emergency situations only. On the spring of '09, I returned from the hospital with my son having heart surgery. As a matter of fact, policeman came to my door to get me. To a barrage of constant noise, windows and dishes rattling, shaking kitchen cupboards approximately every 4 minutes back then. Called the airport and informed we were now directly under the airport's main flight path. This caused so much stress to my son's recovery, you have no idea. Now jets roar over us every 30 to 60 seconds. I've counted about 6 flight paths from Marine View to Pike Highway. Forget watching TV with my antenna. I'm now forced to pay cable because the reception interrupts every 30 to 60 seconds. I have videos of that, by the way. The noise so loud, vibration so hard. My security cam is constantly recording. It drains both motion and cell phone batteries because of notifications. Having a normal conversation outdoors, enjoying our garden, our deck, impossible. Not only because of constant noise, but spraying of who knows what. It often feels like it's raining during clear days. All outdoor furniture, cars stained with brown drops. Asian cargo planes wake us up at 2 and 3 a.m. Wrote to the FAA last year, told we'll look into it. Never heard back. Had tests done, tests show. I have metals unique to jet fuel in my body. No one in my family has ever suffered from asthma, but now I do. My pets suffer from respiratory issues, both of them. We have written letters, called, signed petitions, attended meetings, to no avail. The entire council needs to get involved and help us. We have nothing against progress, but not at the destruction of our health and our beautiful city. Thank you.
Thank you. That was the last individual that was signed up to speak. Is there anybody from the public who didn't sign up to speak who wishes to make a comment on this specific issue? Seeing no one approach, that will take us forward to our Aviation Advisory Committee conversation and presentation. I'll turn it over to Michael to kick us off.
Thank you, Mayor. So we're pleased tonight to have our Aviation Advisory Committee here for a discussion with the council. And we're going to do a PowerPoint and we're going to trade off. I've got the clicker. So if you just tell me when to change slides. You have before you binders that we've put together for council and our committee. A lot of this reflecting, or actually all of it, reflecting efforts by the committee and by the council to address airport and aircraft operations. And I think that based on the comments we just heard, no one is satisfied with where we are. And I think that, I was thinking as the gentleman was talking about the cellular requirements, how in terms of the pecking order, the city is low on the pecking order of the legal ability to impact operations at Sea-Tac. However, we do have pathways to make our voices heard, to respond. This binder has a number of formal letters sent to the port, the airport. The mayor's provided testimony before the Port of Seattle Commission. And, you know, I would say that our efforts and that the focus of the committee is to try to be focused on areas where we can have an impact. And that, I think that's a large part of the discussion tonight. I also want to do a housekeeping thing. Say, Dr. Giora was kind enough to come tonight, but has an early morning flight and will be leaving, I think, at 9, you said? Yeah. So with that, we'd just like to walk through the PowerPoint. And I'll just take the first slide. Basically, the city last spring decided to establish an aviation advisory committee. This was happening in other communities. Subsequent to this, a little later on, the Port of Seattle decided to start a stakeholders roundtable. We've had one meeting of that committee. Our members are, Sheila Brush is on that, I'm on that, and Ken Rogers is also on that. We just had one meeting. I think the jury's out on the effectiveness or value of that process, but we will be hopeful. I guess that's all we can do. Also, so then we went through the process of identifying, you know, people that had applied and went through a selection process. The council appointed our current Aviation Advisory Committee members. You know, I've had the pleasure of working with them, and all of them have brought just such, you know, commitment, knowledge, devotion to finding solutions to this. And that's what we want to share with council. And it's been a pleasure. The issues, I think, are pretty clear, critical issues. We'll walk through what those are. The process is that we need to be interactive with council, and council is anticipating, and we've already done it in certain respects, the position of the committee relative to funding opportunities and involvement that the city council has approved funding for certain activities, that we pass policies and try to establish our position relative to airport operations, collaboratively with other cities. We'll talk more about this, but we've also engaged our partner cities, Normandy Park, Burien, and Sea-Tac, in an interlocal agreement to join forces to review the Sustainable Airport Master Plan environmental process. And Susan from our staff will talk more about that on one of these slides. The PowerPoint is a starting point for discussion. We'll go through it relatively briefly, but the thing is, it's packed with so much information. Any of the slides could be the subject of an hour-long discussion. And finally, the binders provide documentation as to some, and not inclusively, but some of the activities and positions and efforts the city has taken. And with that, go to our next slide. And Wendy, I believe this is what I have to do. Get it? There we go.
Might be able to point it at the screen and have it reflect.
Okay, so the charter established by City Council to guide the work of the committee. The City of Des Moines is establishing an Aviation Advisory Committee to make recommendations to the City Council for actions that can help resolve negative impacts created by the Sea-Tac Airport, to utilize a science-based approach to determine appropriate recommendations to provide to the City Council, and to acknowledge and record pertinent information brought to the committee by its members, members of the community, and invited guests. This was not expressly stated in the charter, but it has been our practice at committee meetings. Okay, charter for the Aviation Advisory Committee. To provide comments on the environmental impact statement of the Sea-Tac Airport Sustainable Master Plan, SAMP, address frequency of operations, a function of Sea-Tac Airport, and parallel impacts on local transportation, health, and noise. Address current aircraft movements on the ground and in the air. Address the process to site and develop a second regional airport. Participate in the Washington Aviation System Plan and follow-up. Delineation of responsibilities within the national airspace regarding aircraft flight operations to include the FAA, Sea-Tac Airport, WashDOT, Port of Seattle, and other issues as determined by the City Council and the Aviation Advisory Committee. I wanted to talk just for a minute about one of these points, and then are we going to have discussion of each part? Okay. So the point of addressing the process to site and develop a second regional airport, this one seems to be not getting much wind beneath its wings, and I think it's an important one that we really need to do. And as far as the environmental impact statement of Sea-Tac Airport, the Sustainable Master Plan, I was looking over some notes that we got at one of our meetings from a presentation to the Sea-Tac City Council by Elizabeth Levitt, Director of Planning and Environmental Programs, and she gave this on January 23rd, 2016. It mentions that Sea-Tac is the fastest growing large hub airport in the United States. What is needed to meet the demand of such a growing airport? They're going to go from 88 operations per hour to 120 without adding runways. They're going to move more planes faster despite more gates and aircraft on the airfield terminal. They're going to add 8 gates now to the existing 92 gates, and they still will need 35 more gates. They're going to add hold rooms and security processing for 43 new gates while handling existing passenger traffic. Potentially, they will build a second terminal within Sea-Tac to serve most of the new gates. On the land side, they need to remove bottlenecks and choke points on airport roadways and drives. Expanding the terminal may wipe out existing airport drives. They want to elevate the gap between goals and future emissions by doing the following: building a spreadsheet model that measures energy, water, GHGs, and operational costs, entering final concepts and evaluating building options, estimating future emissions based on energy and water use, develop management approaches to reduce the gap. And the last one that she said was that they intend to conduct formal environmental reviews, either using a SEPA or a NEPA. The NEPA is the National Environmental Policy Act, and the SEPA is the State Environmental Policy Act. And even though she stated that, we have been hearing recently that now they're considering not doing either of those environmental impact studies.
Thank you, Wendy, and I think that Susan will address some of the environmental options that the airport is considering. Thank you. Let's move on. David? And can you pass him the mic, please? Thank you.
I think Wendy, my observation is that Wendy's observation that
we don't have very much knowledge about the issue of siting a second airport is correct. There hasn't been much traction gained in pushing that forward that I am aware of. There's a lot of heat and not a lot of light so far on that. I wanted to note that to dovetail with the SEPA-NEPA issue here, that in terms of writing impact statements, typically one looks at alternatives to the proposed action. In this case, the proposed action would be expansion of the existing airport, which is hazardous at best. So it puts the light on the alternatives which might be identified in a siting study. And yet we haven't got any progress there. So there are a couple of moving parts right there and sort of immediately ahead of us that I think are going to need a lot more attention than we've frankly given it so far. So to go through the slide here, we have a process where we have regional and state review involving the FAA, airlines, Port of Seattle, and the airport. We don't have a lot of knowledge now as to what that process might be. I believe you can correct me if you wish that FAA leads any siting studies, I believe, and they've at least begun such a process with Puget Sound Regional Council on the baseline study. That's not a siting study. That's just a baseline study. City actions are in your folder under the tab that says siting of a second airport. We've got a few comment letters that have been developed by the city over the past year about the Washington Aviation System Plan. Again, that is not a siting study, but it's warming up to that. We have a follow-up letter to the Puget Sound Regional Council, which is about the baseline study, basically welcoming them to the field of study and volunteering to be of assistance. And that's as far as we've gotten so far. The air cargo study is a third study that is involved with this, since air cargo is proposed to be a very large proportion of the increased activity at the airport. That would have to be involved in a siting study as well. That study has just begun. We don't really know very much about that since we don't have an official legislative seat at the table on that one. Recommendations, and here's the point. This is an area we can do more, indeed. What we have listed here is coordinated effort with City Council to provide input to this process. Actions could include greater council participation at Port of Seattle Commission meetings and one-on-ones with the commissioners. We do have two new commissioners, who are attentive, it seems. Maximize coordination among cities and frequent updates, communicating this clearly to the Port of Seattle. I think it's important to note here that all cities are in agreement in general on the issue, now based on published legislative agendas. We have not coordinated with other cities regarding a siting study as yet. And identifying effective opportunities to participate. This is open-ended. So what do we do next? What are the next right things to do here? And we haven't gotten that far yet. But we focus on leveraging the Highline Forum, which may be underutilized. The forum is now attended by port commissioners, Port of Seattle and surrounding cities. Might be a great venue for Des Moines to lead here if we step forward to help set the agenda, circulate actionable items in advance for discussion and adoption, and recommend to treat this as a working group where actions are initiated, taken, not info sharing. These are ideas to elevate the Highline Forum into this discussion to help forward the idea of a diligent siting study that is timely given the EIS work that we hope will occur. But again, there's a lot of work to be done here. It's highlighted in this last item, which is to assist in identifying the governance dynamic for a second airport. We are unclear as to the process that will be necessary. This was done, I believe, 20 years ago, or thereabouts. It's been a while, and the rules have changed since then. So again, just knowing what the institutional arrangements are for getting this done, we have not completed or even done much progress on this yet. So that's all I have for now.
Thank you. Let's move on to the environmental review of the Sustainable Airport Master Plan and have Susan walk through some of pieces.
Yes, so for the environmental review related to the Sustainable Airport Master Plan, what the focus will be is inputting into the environmental review process at appropriate points where our comments can have the most effect and be on the official record. We'd like to take a look and assess what can be done in relation to recent statements by the Port of Seattle of what they are considering. I don't think any decisions have been made as of yet, but they're considering that they might do a National Environmental Policy Act environmental assessment and a State Environmental Policy Act environmental impact statement. And this appears to be a decision point that we should evaluate to how we could best input or influence that decision. What we've done so far and intend to do, we've invited the Port of Seattle Environmental Director for a discussion with the Aviation Advisory Committee. We've engaged with the airport to challenge decisions that appear to enhance growth outside of the framework of the Sustainable Airport Master Plan. We've joined together in a formal interlocal, the cities of Burien, Sea-Tac, and Normandy Park, to pool our resources and knowledge for the review of the Sustainable Airport Master Plan environmental evaluation. And we'll continue to provide input into the scoping and environmental review through our consultants that we hope to hire together and the environmental officials. We met again today, actually. The recommendations of the committee is that the committee and the city council review and continue to provide formal input at the most effective points in that process, and have a follow-up meeting with the Port of Seattle Environmental Director for a question and answer session with the Aviation Advisory Committee.
Thank you. There's one more slide for Susan to go through, but I want to mention that one of the aspects of this interlocal agreement with our neighboring cities has been for the SEPA officials. Each city has a SEPA official. Susan is our SEPA official. For the SEPA officials to be the ones coordinating the review with a consultant and looking at impacts relative to SEPA process. And if there are issues that come up either for individual cities and or that are outside the SEPA officials' review, the cities can then also attach letters to commenting to the airport on our concerns as individual cities, collective cities, and also through our SEPA officials. So we try to maximize the value of the resources we have focused on environmental process. So let's move to the next slide.
Thank you. Some information that was given at a recent Port Commission briefing by the Port staff. The Sustainable Airport Master Plan is currently now proposed to be divided into 2 phases. And at least, at their thought process or their presentation at that time, this was in February, has one phase being called near-term projects, which is looking out to 2027, and those projects would move forward into the environmental review that we previously talked about, and then there would be a second phase, which is termed the long-term vision, and that would be future planning and future environmental review. One issue or problem with this approach is that some of these decisions that might be made in the first phases could kind of constrain what happens in future phases financially and with capital commitments. The Port staff, this is kind of what we talked about already, but that in that presentation, this is what was presented, is that they will go potentially with a National Environmental Policy Act environmental assessment and a State Environmental Policy Act environmental impact statement. And we are concerned that the Port will not undertake the most rigorous environmental review. We also note, though, that the Federal Aviation Administration plays a key role in determining what the environmental review process is. And I do want to note that the fact that they're talking about doing an environmental assessment, When that environmental assessment is completed, it can result in either an environmental impact statement still being prepared, or it may make a finding that there is no significant impact, and then a statement would not be prepared. So, you know, we don't really know at this point, but they are talking about going through that extra step and not going directly to a National Environmental Policy Act environmental impact statement.
Thank you. It's complicated. Let's move on. So, Mark?
So a really important aspect of this knotty problem is to understand what actual authority and responsibility and role each of these players who are involved has. And it's our hope that we can get a window into that via this stakeholders advisory roundtable. The reports that we've had back from the initial meeting are not encouraging in this regard, but we're I think willing to cut them some slack at least for a bit. We are trying to actively participate in the start. We've, Sheila Brush, Ken Rogers and Michael Mathias are on that committee, and they're not bashful about trying to, push for accountability, which is really good, because a lot of these committees are, if not prodded in the right direction, will kind of default to a lot of buzzwords and, corporate speak and things like that, and say what I call like a verbal souffle, a lot of volume and not a lot of content. And so, we have to plan as a committee for an outcome that is such that we do not get the information we're looking for from the start. And that's going to be, it's going to be really interesting to start doing the digging necessary to find out for each of these organizations, starting with the FAA, which is a great big thing in and of itself, and all the way to the port and everybody else. They do certain things, but how much of what they do is actually statutory, and how much of it is just become custom, because that's what they do. And it would be interesting to kind of, sort of tease that apart to find out just what sort of authority and what the basis for those various authorities are. So, yeah.
Thank you, Mark. One thing that's interesting about what Mark's just describing, we had a discussion at the Aviation Advisory Committee, and Mark brought up the concept, and everyone pretty much added in relative to how can we have accountability if we don't know who's responsible for what. And I don't know if anyone else has had this experience working with the airport, but when you go to the airport and say, what can you do? They go, we can't do anything because it's about the gates and the airlines. And then the airlines, well, no, that's the FAA covers that. And so you hear multiple explanations. And so what our goal was to pin that down. And at the first, the meeting of the Sea-Tac, the stakeholders roundtable, we insisted on that to the degree that it's now the first subject that we brought up at the next meeting, and hopefully there'll be answers to those questions. I think we're all not holding our breath to see what the response is going to be, but like Mark putting that forward as a critical component of knowledge, now that's has a wider audience and support to learn exactly what it is. So that's some of the value of what we've been doing. Let's move on to Steve.
So, in the interest of time, I'm going to turn the mic off. Gump where the mics don't work, and then all he says is, "That's all I have to say about that." That's all I have to say about that. So, okay, all right, okay, thanks. I'm going to try to just highlight some things because there's just so much to cover, and we want to have discussion. So on process, we think about how do we address future impacts, not the here and now, which Sheila's going to talk about because there are here and now problems we have to address. You know, to me, there's just a couple of bright, shiny objects we should pay attention to right now. And obviously, as Susan talked about, we have this SAMP review coming up, and it's kind of scary, but if you think about it, it's also it's a trigger for us to actually do something. I mean, if we didn't have a SAMP coming up, there would be nothing triggering our action, and we would just be suffering without sort of a pathway. So it's interesting that we're scared about it, but we really want to engage in it, and that's exciting that we can try. So it's going to have the environmental review, and we're going to talk about noise, and we're going to talk about health in that process. Susan covered it. It's just really important. It's just really, really important for us to be engaged in. Also on health, there is this ultrafine particle study. You probably already know about that. Here's the thing I think that you would want to think about and just keep in mind as it goes forward is it was pared back by the legislature to just a phase 1, which means at the end of it, at the end of the 2 years, we're going to have some data. But we'll have no actionable item on that data. We won't have a phase 2, which is what we need. In other words, the impacts of what we discover in phase 1. And as we monitor, as members of our council are involved in that study, we want to be vigilant that it is always on the table to go to phase 2, because if we don't get there, it's a waste of time. So that's important. The budget proviso is the last bright, shiny object, and this is, at least to me personally, it's so exciting because this is the update or the new version of what we did 20 years ago, which is purely focused on our 6 south of the airport cities and how we are negatively impacted by this study, by the operations that are here now and being proposed. And that's the focus. It's not balanced by the economic growth. It's not, it is, let's find out how bad it is or how bad it could be. And I think as a council, that's an area where we just want to just babysit that and cocoon that and make sure that's not interfered with and that it goes forward and that we fund it. It's just a great opportunity. So those are 3 just great things to focus on. City action. Again, I would mention support for the ultrafine particle study and really watching for how we ramp up, get the end of the study and define a phase 2. Recommendations, just 2 points to make. On that second bullet, it talks about, it says slow down the planned airport expansion until they work on mitigating, a working plan to mitigate. If you think about it, this is so logical. There's 2 ways to go. One is let's go forward as fast as we can and figure out the problems we caused, which is kind of the way it works now. Or it's like, let's slow down, figure out the problems that we're going to cause, and decide whether that going forward makes sense at all, or how it goes forward. And so to the extent that we can be involved with our consultant to define really scoping is going to be so helpful. So we want to think about that. And then finally, and I think this is a boots on the ground suggestion that everyone on the council, whenever you run into someone on the port, and everyone on our committee, whenever we engage this, we need to be involved in defining what engagement will mean for our community. Because right now, if you listen to what the Port of Seattle is saying in their presentations, is they will define what they think engagement is. And right now, all we've heard is engagement is poster boards in a gymnasium with 40 different people saying, well, this is my little piece, and I actually don't know the answers to your questions. And that's a really, really frightening level of non-engagement. And we need to be involved in saying, if you want to engage our communities and our neighborhoods and our historical districts and everybody that needs to be aware, then bring us to the table and help us understand how many public forums we need for our communities, because that's what we need for engagement, or whatever it is that we need. It's a really, really critical piece, and if we don't jump in, they will define how they engage us, and then say we were well-informed and we participated. So I would say that, hang on to that. Thank you for that time.
Steve, thank you very much. Finally, we're going to talk about current impacts and ask Sheila to talk about that.
Okay, so my role is to address current impacts and the process, hold the airport accountable for current impacts, not just the growth associated with the SAMP. And we all recognize that it's too much, and there's a lot of numbers being tossed around. The $66 million that the public commenter made, in comparison to Dallas-Fort Worth. That's the century agenda. I do not believe that will ever happen. I was fortunate enough to meet for 2 hours last Friday with Commissioner Steinbrück, and he does not believe that will ever happen. So we should get that number out of our minds, because we need to focus on the here and now and what's going to happen under the SAMP. I feel like that century agenda has us all in hysterics. I'm part of the hysteria, and it's never going to happen. But at the 45 million mark that we're at now, it's too much. And under the STAMP, they hope to go to 57 million, and that's absolutely too much. I'm not going to really elaborate on the START, because we've talked about the START too much, but the city has encouraged the airport to engage in the START. But the most important people at the START is the FAA is there. And the FAA has to come to the table. They have to provide community engagement, because in 2018, which is this year, the FAA is going to roll out their procedural changes under NextGen. And I know everybody's heard a lot about NextGen. What exactly is it? But they are going to roll out their procedural changes. The Sea-Tac, the port, frequently says that we're not under NextGen, we're under frequency. But yet the most important impact under NextGen that we are going to deal with is something called wake recategorization. And I don't have enough time to walk anybody through wake recategorization, so I thought the most important thing I could do is provide you a takeaway. And this takeaway was hired by the FAA. It's the U.S. Department of Transportation, the National Transportation System out of Cambridge, Mass. And this talks about the benefits of wake recat. And there's 4 to go that way, and the rest to go this way for all of you. And the most important thing is that I hope that when you look over this, because this is how great it is, but if you just look at the math, when they did all the testing under wake recategorization, they could get 14 more planes, and this was FedEx cargo planes, per hour. So you times that by 24 hours, and this is the big freighters, 14 more per hour. You times that per hour, that's 336 more planes in a 24-hour cycle. So we wonder how our little 3-runway Sea-Tac is going to grow. And are they going to pour another tarmac? No, they're not. They're going to grow through wake recategorization, which follows under NextGen. And so NextGen is the program, but what is going to impact us over our heads is wake recategorization. So I hope you all look at this. Now, just remember, this is pro, because this was the study of why it's so good. And then that brings us to updates from other airports, which brings me to my next handout, which is lawsuits. And Phoenix so far is the only one to win a lawsuit against the FAA, which is super important. And so I got this from the city of Phoenix. This was actually from the city of Phoenix, the airport, and it's on NextGen. And it talks about really what NextGen is and what it means to us as a community. And is it safe? Yes, it is. It is a safer procedure. And is it effective? Yes, there is efficiency. Is it environmentally friendly? No, absolutely not. So again, I hope when you look over what is here and what is NextGen and how it will directly impact us, it will spark your interest, that we have a tsunami coming. It is coming, and it is our responsibility to warn all 230,000 citizens that we have a tsunami coming. And so we do need to have a clear understanding of NextGen. This is just the start of all the information that's out there. We do need to get the FAA to the table, because they are federally responsible to come to the table and start explaining it. And where am I at? Because I digress so much with so much information. And it may be involved working with the airlines. The airlines is also at the start, is at the table. And regarding scheduling of flights, work on current voluntary FAA approval, night flight curfew, engagement with the port, what actions the port has taken and will take to explain, encourage, incentivize airlines' needs and reasons for curfews, and what actions they are taking to encourage voluntary compliance. I will end it with, in Oakland, the START roundtable, I'm going to be very honest, I'm very disappointed with the design of it, and that was designed by the Port of Seattle. And to quote the Port of Seattle, because they know how unhappy I am by the design, they said, "It is unique like no other across the nation." Well, I will tell you what is happening across the nation. In the city of Oakland, for instance, their airport community roundtable, which is actually comprised of elected officials, city managers, and community spokesperson, they have been able to, after a 2-year process, it doesn't happen overnight, they've been able to get a reduction in nighttime flights. But ours is not that. Ours is just strictly made up of non-voting members and city managers. So I don't have great faith that we're going to do anything quick and fast. We also meet every other month instead of every month. But there's a lot of work to do, and there's some important people at that roundtable, so I encourage everybody to come because there is public comment, and only being able to meet every other month. I really encourage people to come, and there's food.
Okay, thank you, Sheila. So I think there's a couple of things. We're going to go to questions now and discussion with the council and the committee. But I think that the two things that are striking is the complexity of these issues. The strategic, I think Steve's referring to points of access to try to make something happen. And then thirdly, you know, the degree of effort and time and attention all of our committee members have put into just getting to this point. So we really appreciate that. And with that, we'll turn it over to the council if you have questions for our committee.
I actually have, I have many, but I'm going to share with the body here. I'd like to, I normally wait till the end, but I got to ask this one before I get, before I turn it over to the rest of the council, please. So please indulge me for a second. You know, I've got notes over everything that everybody said, and I've been pretty closely connected to much of this, as you've seen my signature and you've heard me in conversation. I'm trying to figure out the priorities. One of the things I struggle with is some people think that Payne Field is the siting of the second airport. I agree a second airport's necessary, but I'm curious if the committee really thinks or has some reason to believe that if there were another airport sited, that this airport still wouldn't try to grow to its capacity. I'm not sure that I don't believe that they wouldn't continue on the path they're on, even with the second airport. So I'm not saying it's not important. I think it is important. I also know that it is something that, we are involved with the PSRC. I know that their study is going to come forward with recommendations. Those are going to the state because it's the state that's going to have to argue over how to get that and where to put that other airport. And I'm not sure they won't say it's Payne Field. So I'm asking because everybody knows how slippery this slope is and what a challenge it is to deal with this entity. I do have the person that was here earlier that said we don't remember what happened 10 years plus ago. I was part of the ACC representing the Highline School Board. Contrary to what is often said in the community that the ACC lost. Well, the ACC in court, in fact, didn't lose. They won under an environmental law. But after the ruling, the law was changed. That allowed the third runway to be built. So there was a victory and a loss, but the truth of the matter is millions and millions of dollars went down a path, and with the intent of victory, they got there, and then they lost anyway. So we have to try a new approach, and that's why I'm really pleased that we have the minds around this table and the community involved in this. But we need to figure out, where is our priority? What are we going to focus on? And so I'm going to go back to that singular question. And then I had Deputy Mayor Pennington recognized and Councilmember Bangs. And I firmly believe that there isn't anybody sitting here that doesn't want to go next. So priorities. Please.
All right, it worked. So the question about, I thought it was a very, very good question. If Payne Field or elsewhere, does the port want to grow anyway? And my sense, and I don't think I'm speaking for the committee because we haven't talked about it as a committee necessarily. My sense is the port has undertaken, in almost, to me, the word is enabler. The port has become the enabler for the next 25 years of air traffic growth in the region to be at Sea-Tac Airport. That's the master plan. That's the century agenda. So they are, without, in a vacuum, saying, well, we can handle it. And this is our plan to move forward to handle the region's needs. And in essence, that takes an enormous burden off the state because they have their needs met. Because the needs of the few that live in the airport pathway are being measured against the needs of everybody in the state or even everybody in the larger region who actually don't care that we have a lot of problems in our 6 airport communities. So if all of the cities are in agreement that we need a second airport to stop the growth or to slow the growth or to move the growth, if the port continues to take the position that it can handle the growth, the state is, I don't see a whole lot of incentive for the state to jump in. So it seems to me that the port is the linchpin of this. If the port, who publicly kind of says it's on the fence and it'll support studies about a second airport, it's not saying we won't do it, but we love studies. If the port were to go to the state and said, you know what, we've really looked at this and we are capped, the smart thing to do would be to get that second airport in Eastern Washington. That would change the conversation enormously, right? I mean, almost overnight. But if the port continues to say we can enable all the growth for the next 25 years at Sea-Tac, you just don't, where does the energy from any other legislative body come from? Because the problem's been solved as long as they're pitching that. So it's a real challenge, and I think that's why when we say bright, shiny object, second airport, focus on the Port of Seattle, I think that's the way it has to go. I don't know if that's an answer to your question. I don't think they stop until.
So I guess my point was I'm back to the question of priority.
Okay. Well,
because when I look at this, even given what you just said, I mean, it seems clear to me we continue to work with the new director. We still try to make inroads. We do need to understand the roles and authority because we still get that it's not me, that's them. And they say, no, it's not me, that's them. And it's still this, everybody's pointing to everybody else. We need to get that clarified. But because I want other people to have time to ask questions, I'm going to leave that as food for thought. If someone could come back with that, even if you're not sure tonight, you want to wait till your next meeting. Because again, you've talked about letters that I can write. I'm okay with that. I'm okay to go out and do this work. I want priorities. I want to set focus. I really want to go do this. I really appreciate what everybody on this committee is doing to go through the information, to ferret out those key issues and give us a shot. But give me something to go with, and I will. Deputy Mayor Pennington and then Councilmember Banks.
So first off, thank you all for, this is a huge undertaking. And thank you for the folks the folks, Sheila and some of the others that kind of started this and got the conversation going in our community. And thank all of you for stepping up because it's will become a life's work, I believe. And so that's a big commitment. So my question is, what's the message that you feel that council members should consistently deliver to port commissioners? And I say that keeping in mind that we work in a process that we follow what's called parallel engagement in government. So council members engage typically with port commissioners. The city manager would engage typically with the port, staff and executive director. So I think it's important that we deliver our message. Steve, you talked about telling the story or having engagement, and I'm a firm believer that if we don't tell our story, somebody else will, and it's not the story particularly that we want to be told. And so again, what's the message that you feel that you want us as a group of council members to consistently deliver to the port commissioners as we engage with them.
So I'm going to take that real quick. So I think the most important thing we have to do is change their minds, because I went to a breakfast and the mayor was there, and unfortunately you left early because the closing statement was so alarming by the outgoing port commissioner and president, Tom Albro. And I actually recorded the meeting because the recording equipment wasn't working, so I've listened to it many times. And former commissioner and president Tom Albro said to a jam-packed room that there could be another airport tomorrow, and Sea-Tac is still going to grow. And it is up to all of you elected officials in this room to go back to your communities that are complaining, because their complaints are a poor man's proposition. So it is up to you to change their minds. So it is really up to us and up to you elected officials now to change the port staff and the port commissioner's minds that it's too much, we can't take anymore, because their mind is growth.
Go ahead.
Just one comment too, man. I think that to appreciate, this is not a one-time. This is an interactive dialogue that we'll continue to have with the council. And I also want to mention that I think the issue of priorities is certainly not something that just, is off the cuff type of, let's do this. I think that the committee needs to really carefully consider what those are and then let the council know what we think the priorities are. Same with the messaging. Sheila's given an example, and maybe there are others that could be formulated into something the committee believes. Maybe it's the words that Sheila's used or something, some elaboration on that. But I think that in some respects, next steps might be congealing around responses to what the council is asking as a concept. So it's an ongoing process.
Before you hit that, I can tell you just from the two people that have spoken so far, the term "slow down" and let's work with this is starting to resonate a little bit. And if that is part of that message, that's fine. I'm already using it, but I'll continue to work forward with that. But did that?
Yeah, and I think, I don't know that you have to answer that tonight, but as a group, and it goes along with the priorities, your priorities, and then the story or the message that you would like us to consistently deliver, and that can always be updated and changed, but we're gonna start it, and we're gonna start the conversation, and we're gonna start telling our story chapter at a time until we get them to believe in what we're doing and understand our story and take that home and tell it to the rest of them, because that's what we have to do.
Okay, and Ken, Councilmember Banks had a comment or a question that she wanted to, so she needs a microphone.
So I will state that in the past and even now I have to recuse myself from comments. However, I will say this. I totally believe that this group has done an amazing job. I have a lot of respect for what's been done. I know all of us who live under the third runway, or 16 right or 16 left, 16 center, doesn't matter. It impacts us all. I just can't tell you how much pride I have in what you've done, because it's not an easy job, and yet you persevere. So I think as council members, I know we're all very supportive. Right now I can't be, but at this point in time, I would ask the question, what else is Burien, Sea-Tac, Normandy Park, and the city of Des Moines planning to do besides the letter or getting someone to come in and review SAMP? Is that the first step? And then there's other things that will be going on? Has there been a discussion related to that?
Ken, did you want to go and then?
Okay, thanks. And I appreciate those comments, but I wanted to pile on to something Steve and Sheila said. I was at that meeting with Sheila when Albros made those statements, and it was pretty stark. He's gone now. It occurs to me that when you ask about the question of priorities, that's exactly the right thing to be doing right now, because the START committee has only met once, and it's, we're trying to have a good bring a good attitude to that process, right? A productive and constructive attitude to that process, so we'll see how it turns out. But what we're working on are two separate projects that you might have to think about the priorities differently. So there may be a little refinement to the question that you want to ask so that you get a satisfying answer. Steve talks about the future, which is important because we have a better chance, in my view, to influence that. The Strategic Airport Master Plan opens the door to us to participate in a process that's going to last longer than any politician here, at the port, at the state, or anywhere else. To try to unscrew something that they get wrong in the beginning is going to take a whole lot more time, effort, and energy and probably be unsuccessful in the end, versus trying to get involved in the front end of that and steer it in a direction that makes more sense to us. So we have the future set of priorities. Then we have what's going on right now, and I think Sheila's focused primarily on that. And that's super important because that affects everybody here, and it affects some of the shaping of how we and other communities participate in this process of this Airport Master Plan. Now, I don't want to state the obvious, but the Port of Seattle doesn't care about a second airport because it's not going to be in their jurisdiction. It's not going to be in King County. So to the extent that their growth aspirations might be influenced by that, I would be surprised if they would have a lesser appetite for growth if a second airport were sited anywhere but King County, and that's highly unlikely. So the question in my mind, or at least why I was motivated to do a lot of different things, but not the least of which was try to get involved with this, is who's responsible for what? And how do we approach that process with the limited amount of time, energy, and effort that we have collectively and individually? So in my mind, the priorities are first and foremost to find out who's responsible for what, so that we can take our resources and marshal them in ways that make sense to the future project and the current project. That's not a very good way to describe it, but the process going forward and the process we're all living with now. And the only way to do that with any kind of hope for some kind of successful outcome is to target those energies on the entities that are in control or are influential, whether it's the port staff on the lowest level, or the commissioners, state legislature, federal government, all that stuff. So until we have some clarity around the right way to go about that for those two different projects, I think that we'll not get the best use of our time and energy without that clarity.
So,
So the City of Berrien has an aviation advisory committee as well. They just reformed in the new election year and regrouped with new people. The City of Federal Way has a mayor's task force, and they are doing a charge report that they hope to have done. It does not have any city council, and it is not. It's different. I'll just leave it at that. And they are doing a charge report that they hope to have done at the end of April. Normandy Park is a partner. They don't have any aviation, but they are a partner in this process for such a small city. The city of Sea-Tac, of course, was the host city, if you will, in putting the proviso together with their $250,000 chunk of change to get everybody to get behind it. And am I leaving anybody out? And the city of Tukwila, I was kind of surprised to see that they were even on the start, because at every meeting I've ever been to, they really only see the Sea-Tac as an economic engine and not as an impact. And I think, does that answer your question? Okay.
You know, I'd like to add to that, there's also the forum of the mayors and city managers that meet from the four cities, Normandy Park, Berrien, Sea-Tac, and Des Moines, who meet monthly. This issue comes up all the time. It was kind of the original issue. So, and I think that I really agree with the idea that coordination is critical among our cities and all the comments that have been made, because Ken's right on target. You know, where do we focus, right? We put $25,000 into the ultra-fine. We're going to put $50,000 into the Sustainable Airport Master Plan review. We're going to participate in the proviso. Financially, we'll bring some information to council in terms of how do we also participate with that. So I mean, yeah, it's complex, but it really needs to be targeted where we get the most effectiveness. And I think one key thing about the Sustainable Airport Master Plan, which has already been said, is it gives us a window. It's a legal requirement that we get to comment. And that wouldn't be the case, business as usual. We wouldn't necessarily have that opportunity. And I just mentioned one other piece of this relative to jurisdiction, is that in the state of Washington, there's one of the revised code of Washington, the laws, is that ports are directed to facilitate economic development, and that's their job. And in some respects, you could say that's a perverse incentive to trying to address environmental impacts that will constrain their ability to meet the requirements of the state law relative to what their duties are. So there's a number of places where it's a huge fight, right? But that's absolutely no reason not to proceed with all, full speed ahead. But just as a comment, I mean, the dynamic is complicated.
It is. It's not unlike thinking about the past with economic growth. Do you know if that is their sole charter, or is it? And the reason that the reason I ask this is because it reminded me. I just had a thought that it reminded me of the somewhat dual mandate of the United States Forest Service, which is tasked with preservation of forest, promoting economic development, promoting recreation, these various things. And so their job is not to do any one of those things at the expense of all the others. And I was wondering if the port had a similar kind of construct that they are supposed to operate on, but they choose to ignore.
There's two parts to the answer. Of course, they're charged with transportation.
Right.
Right, and logistics. But the other thing is that essentially, the world's kind of dividing itself into global cities. Well, all global cities have major significant airports.
Yeah.
Typically, they're built outside of the urban area, right? In our case, we've got one from 1947 that's, civil aircraft, right? So there's a lot of layers in answer to your question. Certainly a subject we could take up more.
Yeah.
Just a partial answer. So, actually, in the port's mission statement in its bylaws does include still reference to their role as environmental stewards as a balance. Now, what's interesting about that is Commissioner Albro's last legislative act was a number of bylaw amendments in which he had proposed including taking out the word environment from the mission statement. So you get an idea of what the difference is in terms of who the commissioners are, about how different. And fortunately, Commissioner Fellman sort of said, I don't think we should take the word environment out. And the rationale that Commissioner Albro gave on the record was he thought it would simplify things. So fortunately, we didn't remove environment from the bylaws. It's still there, but it's precarious. But it's still something we can hang a hat on.
Okay, so I had Councilmember Back. Did you still want the floor? And then Councilmember Mahoney.
So it's been said already, but thank you guys, the committee, for your passion. This is a Goliath of a fight, and it's a long fight. But especially thanks to Steve doing this fight 2 minutes at a time at the Port of Seattle, or 3 minutes, whatever you're getting. Appreciate your passion. So the question's kind of for Steve, and Michael mentioned, the point of access. So on this ultrafine particulate study, I know it's a ways off before we see the results. They're going to come back with some findings, obviously. There'll be some data we can look at, maybe some health effects of what is happening to us, what's happening to some of the people that spoke tonight. So maybe it's too soon to say, but when we get that data, is this something the committee is thinking you're just going to go to the port with that, or are we going to go back to the state saying, hey, state, you're the ones that helped get this data for us. Get on our back here and help us fight this thing a little bit. I mean, where do you see that information being used once that data comes in? Or is it too soon to say? But
unless someone else wants to jump in, I think that is a very big question. There is a very robust committee of people that are involved in monitoring this study. all of whom will have, I assume, feedback about what the data, when it comes in, what it means. And is that data sufficient to justify the state actually going back and funding a stage 2 that would then say, which was in the original legislation, to take the data that comes in and then say, okay, now that we know that these elements are in the environment, now we need to have the study, how do they impact human beings? How do they impact the natural environment? So we don't have that phase 2 right now. And I think the issue that I am concerned about is how the cities and those that are, living in this environment and want to protect our quality of life, how it is that we can continue to make sure that if it comes back and says, this is all much ado about nothing. Noise isn't a problem, pollution's not a problem, have some more coffee with your coffee in the morning. It's all good for you. I don't think that's what we're going to find out. I think we're going to find out that there's problems. Is to make sure we keep pushing towards phase 2, because if there's not a phase 2, that would make it actionable, right? We'd have data, and then we'd have a phase 2 and says, okay, now we know we have problems. Now we can get information and more science to make this actionable. It's much ado about nothing. So I think as we monitor, in the back of your mind, it's always like, are we taking every step possible so that we are positioned when this data comes in to go on to the phase 2, which will actually allow us to use this information for something that's actionable to protect our citizens. And that's all you can do, I think, while the scientists go forward. Or, make sure no one's interfering with the scientists. That's a big issue, Paying attention to the comments that are provided in review processes. Who's making the comments? What are they kind of suggesting? Where is it steering? We don't want to do that. We want the scientists to do the science without undue interference. And so we have to really pay attention to subtext and what kind of communications are floating around so that they're independent.
And last question, do we know, has there been any similar study in the nation with other communities near a major airport as far as the ultrafine particulates and the health effects and all of that? Is there anything that this is going to be compared to, or is this a groundbreaking thing that has never been done before?
Well, Sheila probably knows a lot about that, but I know that there is, and the scientists on this study already have cited this repeatedly. The Los Angeles study is out there, and I think there are other studies out there, and they all tend to suggest we're gonna find that we've got problems, Now, to the degree of satisfaction of all the stakeholders, will they all agree that there's enough science to suggest that, we've got problems, or do we need more studies? That's always gonna be the debate down the road. But there are already studies underway or completed, and LA being one. Sheila, do you have the list of others that are underway?
They're just underway.
Okay.
LA, but I do have some breaking news, though, that came out of DC, and I meant to give this to Michael, and I'll hand it down, and this is just April 4th, and this isn't an omission, but this is about the noise, which is another impact. And so, as you know, our Congressman Adam Smith is on the National Quiet Skies Caucus, and why the public is naming these Quiet Skies, in case you didn't know, is because there is actually a congressional Quiet Skies Caucus. And so 18 members of Congress, just on April 4th, did submit in writing as members of the National Quiet Skies Caucus, Caucus and Congress, that they are drafting the fiscal year 2018 transportation, housing and urban development appropriation bills to seek funding to look at the noise, that the DNL, because that 65, I mean, I'm kind of at a loss for words because it's not even science. It was a group of people, it was a test group of people that said, yeah, that'll work. And it took place in the 70s. So this just came in, and it is for the nation, about the millions of Americans that are being impacted, and that they need the funding to go back and truly do a true noise study. And so this, as I said, just came in, and Adam is not, Congressman Smith is not a signature here, but he's very active in all of this. And I meant to hand this in to Michael, since I just received it through the National Quiet Skies Caucus. Yeah, good news.
Thank you. Anecdotally, what I'd heard is that initial noise level was set based on the volume of a lawnmower.
Probably.
Councilmember Mahoney. Yeah, well, how many people cut their lawns? And yeah. Wouldn't be that offensive, I guess, huh? So I have Councilmember Mahoney, then I have Councilmember Nutting. Councilmember Buxton, I wasn't sure, I didn't see a signal from you, so, okay, so we'll go that way. You have the floor.
I wish we could almost make the quiet skies terminology add not only the noise pollution, but the air pollution in its reference and priority. I'll just make that quick statement. I got a few questions. I'm gonna ask 4 of them concerning the SAMP, and I think they could be answered sort of together. First of all, I just kind of get an idea of what the anticipated answers of what you'll be looking for in this SAMP. I know a consultant's going to do it, but if we could get a little bit of an example there. I'd like to know who will be evaluating not only the Sustainable Airport Master Plan, but also our comments. And honestly, are they independent? Because it seems like we get things flavored with a direction that we would not win in. Let's put it this way, I'm looking for somebody independent. And then has there been any word on who would be the consultants that would be answering the SAMP questions as far as what they are, who they are, and what their background is?
So, yeah, so right now, the 4 cities are in the process of both soliciting and, reviewing as they come in, consultants, qualifications to do this. I think that it's, I'm not saying this is the end game, I'm just mentioning that what are the resources available to a city like Des Moines and now joining with other cities to review the SAMP. And what we're able to do is challenge or say, we don't feel that this was adequately reviewed or addressed in the SAMP and the environmental documents. And if we were to come to a point where we felt that we were not being heard, we do have recourse to legal process if we choose. That's always out there. So I think that this is potentially something that to the degree to which we take it serious, it can have serious consequences in the process, hopefully in a way that addresses our concerns.
All right. Next question. As far as the air cargo study, I see it's happening. I hadn't had a chance to really glance through it, but who's actually in that group is doing that study? I'm sure the port probably has a hand in it, but who else would? No, actually independent?
So it's the Washington State Department of Transportation, but I just want to qualify the air cargo study. A lot of people think that it's new, that it's happening. Now we're scrambling. It's not new. So the original citing of the air cargo study was back in 2015, and really interesting when they met to study, it's about growing cargo. It's not about moving cargo from Sea-Tac. It is about the entire state growth cargo and how they're going to manage it. And what's super interesting is back in 2015, when they originally came together to talk about this, it directly impacted the 3rd runway because they realized then we have to start using the 3rd runway all the time. And at the time, Commissioner Crichton, on record, said, what about the promises we made? So I do like that little story because it was recognized as recent as 2015 that they did promise not to use the 3rd runway as they're using it today. But the cargo study is from the Washington State Department of Transportation. I believe Michael can correct me if I'm wrong. And it is to look at growing cargo within the entire state, not moving cargo out of Sea-Tac. And I think people are misunderstanding that this study is somehow going to give us some relief, and that's not the intent of this study. Maybe some relief will come from it, but that is not the intent of this study.
Thank you.
Let me just add one thing. I think that we had, Senator Kaiser's staff person come and talk with us about the air cargo study. And then I think the next month we had the environmental director from the Port of Seattle talking about the Sustainable Airport Master Plan. And the commonalities in both those presentations was that they're seeking capacity, not the addressing environmental impacts. The air cargo, as Sheila points out, under the State Department of Transportation, They have an aviation division of one person. They look at system-wide aviation impacts, but this is where the complexity in all of this comes up, right? Is that you got the state looking at certain aspects of the statewide aviation system. However, you got Sea-Tac that is governed essentially by the FAA and the Port of Seattle. So you got federal involvement, you have state involvement, you got local involvement, regional involvement, you know, and then so it's just this multi-layered, complex situation. So the state really doesn't control Sea-Tac. It can influence the port, because Sea-Tac's an international airport, abiding by, you know, the International Civil Aviation Organization rules that were established in the 40s for the freedoms of aircraft travel on the planet. And they're subject to conventions established long ago in a completely different international context. So it's extremely, the point being it's complicated. And the point I think, and Sheila, I think you were making this point, it's not a panacea. There's no one particular solution. It's multiple solutions to address all of this.
I noticed something that I'm not sure, I think it's missing. I believe new technology, whether it's the hybrid stuff or whatever they're talking about, could eventually maybe be a solution, maybe for the noise as well as the emissions. And I think maybe that should be one of our priorities as far as we go further. Maybe spurring that on and encouraging that type of technology to come forward. I mean, I know it's a ways off, but it's something we're doing for our children and our grandchildren. So that's not necessarily, I guess, a question as much as a statement, other than the fact that should it be one of our priorities? And then the last question, and I'm just going to go on the second airport. I'm kind of the mindset that I do think it benefits us, because I'm a businessman and I believe in supply and demand, and I believe in competition. You go to other places, and I always say this, you go to San Francisco, you've got San Francisco, San Jose, Oakland Airport. You go to LA, you got LAX, Burbank, John Wayne, Bob Hope. Airlines compete. They like to take real estate. And I think what we do is we set it up where by driving for a second airport, one of the major drivers is we get maybe one of these major airlines to move their hub there, and that's where they focus off of. And I think at least if it doesn't reduce it, it pauses it and gives us more chance to fight the fight. But I also think that a city of this size, the mistake was they didn't cite one 25 years ago or 30 years ago, however long it should have been. So my question is, with that in mind, I would like to see or get some ideas from the Aviation Advisory Committee about what's our battle plan? Who do we go after? Who's the message? What do we say? Who can we persuade? I want to help, and that question right there. And the other question is, what as a city council can we do for the Citizens Advisory Committee? The Aviation Advisory Committee as a committee. What else have we talked about that we can do for you? So those are my last questions, and I'll let somebody answer them.
Well, I'm wondering, those are open-ended. I've got a couple more folks that want to jump in, and I'm thinking, unless somebody has, on the committee right now wants to take a shot at that, I think they have that to think about and work on at an upcoming meeting. Is that, yes, please. Can we have a microphone turned on next to you, please? Oh, you're going to get two.
Seems to me that the last part of your question dovetails a lot with Matt's original question around priorities, around what should we prioritize. And I wish I could say that in the course of our discussions, we'd figured out that there is a priority, that there is a path to quote unquote success on this thing. I think what has become enormously clear is that we don't know. That there may be one that will emerge over some time, but at this point we don't have a clear one priority, that one buzzword that we can all talk about here. But there are several, and I don't think there are too many to sort of wrap our minds around. and the number one thing that comes to me is emphasizing the looming public health disaster that we may be facing. Right? I think that this is a whole different situation. Well, it's a much more intensified situation from the third runway era because we do have ultrafine particles. We do know that the science behind the decibel levels is faulty. We do have a lot more evidence of public health effects here. So when we talk about having the potential for public health emergency, that gets a lot more attention. I think that's important as a priority, as a message that can be properly crafted, moved around. The other one is that obviously the current airport ain't going to do it, and we got to come up with other alternatives. And I can say a couple things about that. There's nothing set in concrete around these projections of cargo. That large part of that, the port has made it sound like that is immovable demand, when in fact it's been a conscious choice to sell Seattle as a hub. We don't have to be a hub. Okay? The actual local demand, if you want to talk about local demand, it's going at about the same rate as population, 3% a year, which is manageable. It's the hub that's responsible for the bulk of that. The other part is that it may not be a second airport. We're talking about alternatives to satisfying demand at the airport here. It may be a few different options to handle it. It doesn't have to be another airport necessarily. It may be multi-pronged, but the idea is here that there are a few talking points that we can talk about as priorities. Getting the second airport study more solidified, identifying public health, and really paying attention to the SAMP, because the strategies that they're using to end-run environmental regulations, I think, are there and a very strong potential. So there's three things there. But it's like looking at a maze. How many different ways are there to get through the maze to some end result? We don't know at this point.
Well, the one thing that I would say when I mentioned priorities, I wasn't looking for one. I realize it's too big for that.
This is a manageable
But when
number,
the committee meets again, to come back with the feedback to the council would be really appreciated. Councilmember, let's see, I had Councilmember Nutting and then Councilmember Buxton.
I just have one comment and a question, I guess. Sheila brought up Oakland, and over the years they've been very successful over airplane noise. I don't know if it's the municipality. I doubt it's a topographical issue, but anybody that's had the pleasure or displeasure of flying into Oakland, basically the plane drops out of the sky onto the runway, and when they take off again, it's straight up in the air. And that can't be topographical. That has to be because of what municipalities have done around them for noise control. And if noise control is one of our things that we want to take on, looking at what they've done over the last few years on legislation to take care of that as well would something that I suggest we take a look at, because they've been very successful.
The thing with Oakland is that it's different from Sea-Tac, and this is why we always hit a brick wall, is because the city owns the airport. And so, and it's interesting that the cities that own the airport, like Sky Harbor, they push back against the FAA and they say, no, these procedural changes are unacceptable. And our port is partnering with the FAA because these procedural changes are going to allow them to grow. And it's interesting on the cargo, they had a cargo convention within the last 4 months. And at this cargo convention, it was a national cargo convention, and it was hosted this time at the at the airport. And one of the opening statements was, the Sea-Tac Airport was never designed to be a cargo facility, but we're going to make it work. And it's not working, and they know it's not working. And so it was interesting because when I met with Commissioner Steinbrook, he recognizes that cargo needs to go, that is such a stress on our community, especially at night. So there is immediate things that the port could do, and they've got to quit pointing the finger at the FAA, but it is at an economic cost to them, and that's why your voice has to be, but our quality of life is diminishing. So we have to, again, go back to changing their program to grow, and we need to be a constant voice of they're done. And other cities are recognizing that they're done, because it doesn't matter what airport has it, it all goes back to the state, because it's not, you know, in a way, the port is like the Gambino family. I mean, they just are responsible to no one but themselves. And I say that directly to the port, so this is nothing new. I kind of like saying it.
And no disrespect to anybody with the last name Gambino. Did you get everything asked? Okay, so I think our last question goes to Tracy. You get cleanup. 2 microphones.
Whoa.
Stereo.
Well, echoing everybody else, thank you. This is a lot of work, and you meet other times besides tonight. So it's a lot of passion and effort from a lot of community volunteers and minds and hearts. So thank you. I just had, other than all the other questions that have already been asked, one question of clarification, Steve, in regard to the air particle study. I was a little surprised to find at the Highline Forum that it was divided up into, that there was going to be a phase 2 required, and somehow possibly even a phase 3, that the study now was just trying to determine that there were particles in the air, and that phase 2 could determine what kind of particles they were, and that phase 3 would determine the health impacts of those kinds of particles. Did I misunderstand that? In other words, if you can comment on, is this going to turn out to be a 2 or 3 or a 4 phase study when the first phase doesn't even get their results until December 2019? I'm a little concerned about, we're trying to move forward with all these other things, and we're kind of waiting on pins and needles for this health impact, especially when the sound, regardless of the validity of the sound impact studies, we still have navigation easements hanging over most of the heads of our residents. And so this is a brighter hope. Can you comment on that?
You and I are at the same meeting, listening
Yes.
to the same thing. And I think you heard it more or less correctly. I guess the message I take away, you know, other than we have to be vigilant in monitoring going forward, is this is not something to wait on. You know, we don't want to say, well, we're not going to engage on the subject of the potential health and environmental risks from the activities of overflying aircraft, because in 219 we'll get some information that might lead to another study that will be in 221 that will lead to another study that will be in 223, because none of that will ever help us on the SAMP. It won't help us on anything. It's going to go on and on. So the study's great. Let's monitor it. Let's be vigilant. Let's get a phase 2 and phase 3, or a phase 2, get to the impacts. But I think, and I just to shift back to something I have found extremely encouraging about this evening, is that, and I just made some lists, because I think this goes to priorities, you know, setting priorities, because this committee can do that. I mean, it's a mess, but this is the committee that can sit down and say, here's your one sheet, here are the 5 things, this is the order we think they're important. Then you gotta have messaging behind that, and I think it's a brilliant question, simple question, but this committee can do that. And, you know, if that all falls under a battle plan, that's a larger one, you know, we can participate in that. And what's encouraging is that what we're hearing as a committee is you want to engage in this process and get out in the community. And that's cool. I mean, that's cool. That's a legal term? Cool? Yeah, that is awesome. So, and it actually goes back to an offhanded comment you made at the very first meeting, was I want to throw a punch. And I think we're kind of circling back to say, let's do that. I think you know, we can really get on those things. Those are the right questions. I think we've been like gathering information and kind of like, okay, where is this all stuff? We can do that, and I think we can. I'm guessing the other committee members think that we can. I think we can do it faster than another 6 months. You know, I think we can really fast track the answers to those questions, so that when you're out in the community, we're all saying the same thing. The benefit that will, I'm so sorry, Tracy, to take this.
Heavens,
but,
no.
But the benefit of that will also be, I think, an incredible opportunity for leadership by this city for the other cities. Because if we're out branded, if we got the messaging right, You will be followed, and that will make it so much easier for the 6 cities to hang together, is my guess. Because they'll all go, I want to follow, that's right, they've got it figured out. This is what we're gonna do. So, boy, I want to help answer those questions, so I just segued to that. I don't know if I answered yours.
Go. In fact, my questions could be, I think it would be great at this point to defer to Matt's last question. I thought it was a fabulous question, so.
Can I add something that?
Yeah.
So this is something I spoke with Michael about yesterday that I was taking on with Quiet Skies, but I would love for it to be a city project, and that's because, as I said, I met with Commissioner Steinbrook, and I want a town hall. I want a commissioner town hall where we get asked the questions, and he said yes. And so I was gonna ask Commissioner Fellman, and I'm sure that Commissioner Calkins will say yes. And so I was gonna do it under Quiet Skies, and then I spoke with Michael about it, and he thought it was a great idea. And I would love to do it under the city of Des Moines. I would love to just do it as the city, with the city council, and with Michael, and to work on that. But I think that we deserve at least a town hall where we can ask and I don't wanna skew the commissioners. What I want is to have the citizens to be able to ask the important questions about our present and about our future, and to get direct answers. And that's only fair. So I think that would be something really powerful, and again, being the host city, that we could all work on. And I've already gotten one yes. So, I mean, I'm almost there.
It seems like a reasonable idea. The only thing that I would like to do in preparation for that is I'd like to go back to, the concept of getting us together cohesively, answering the questions. There are not that many questions there to ask. I think what the council said in a lot of different ways is almost the same thing tonight. Anything from priorities to battle plan to, whatever. So if the committee could help us come together so that when we walk into that room, we're already on the same page with our view, our messaging, everything. And then I think it would be a beneficial discussion. I don't know what its outcome would be, but because the statement was made, I think, by Ken Rogers earlier, that, this will outlive any of the politicians that are here and any of us in the room. But the fixes that you can put in place early on are going to be the most impactful. So, let's do this right if we're going to do it. And I think, again, I can't speak for the entire council. I think it sounds like a reasonable and a good idea to me. I think the community would benefit from it. But I think it has to be, we have to be together and ready to do this. And then we need to do it in a way that they will feel comfortable coming and working with us. Absolutely. And I think with that, Michael, do you have some closing thoughts?
Yeah.
Well,
I think I should do this full time is what.
Well, let me say, in the beginning, you said any one slide could take an hour. Well, you're ahead of schedule.
Right. No, I think that, this is a pretty critical discussion. And I think that committee taking on kind of an understanding of these issues and establishing priorities, communicating those to council, and finding what the message is that we want to consistently deliver is powerful. And in some respects, that's really all the power we have, right? Is the messaging and the complaint and the strategy of how to utilize our energy and our understanding of these issues. So I think committee has a meeting Monday, and I think we have our agenda. I thought we'd review tonight. I think that's exactly what we can do and start working on the priorities. And, I think that, I think it's along the lines of, and it's sort of the David Goliath perspective, but it's that focused effort by people accomplishes a lot. And I think that we have the potential for a focused effort from everyone in this room at this table, and the community. And so let's throw the punch. Let's get ready to duck, but let's throw the punch. So anyways, thank you, everyone.
We do have other business. We have 5 minutes that we could extend, or Michael had suggested that the city manager report and emerging issues could be moved to our next agenda? Or
Yeah, April 12th.
April 12th.
And can I just also want to thank staff who's here to do those reports. I think this might have been informational, hopefully, for everyone, so.
Oh, it just dawned on me. I was thinking they were really, they were here to be part of that team here. Get there, look, boxing gloves, I don't know. Anyway, so with the council's indulgence to modify the agenda to move these to the April 12th? Everybody okay? Okay, so we do have consensus to that. So, before we adjourn, the last comment I would like to make is that because I've seen the outcome look like a win and go the other direction, that's why it's really important to me to have us come together and do the right thing and do it really well. And everybody has said here that I think that the body of work that's been done so far, the commitment of the community and the people on the various committees is amazing. But that will help us, hopefully. It's a different approach. But it will hopefully give us the punch that matters. Okay? So with that, do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second. I have a motion made by Deputy Mayor Pennington, seconded by Councilmember Nutting. All those in favor, raise your right hand, say aye. Aye. We're adjourned. Thank you for coming.